Hello everyone, welcome back to the Ecoholics channel. In today's session, we will be discussing the Indian Economic Service 2025 paper. As you all know that the IES 2025 paper was scheduled on 28th June, 21st June and 22nd June of 2025. So, in this video, we are going to do a detailed analysis of your General Economics 1 paper for part B, that is quantitative methods in economics, mathematical economics, statistics, econometrics. So if you have given this exam this year or you're planning to give this exam, the discussion we are going to have today is very important for you. It's going to provide you some valuable insights around how to attempt a question, what to write, what exactly the paper is asking you, and how to avoid some mistakes which the question is specifically creating for you. So in this video, we will be discussing the part B of your General Economics 1 paper. All right, so let's get into this video and start with our paper discussion. Section A. Now in Section A, as you all know that all the parts are compulsory. So out of all the parts, only 2 parts were related to part B, that is quantitative methods in economics. Now section A has questions of 5 marks each, which have to be written in 100 words, okay, approximately 100 words. Now always remember, when it comes to a 5-marker question, you will find many times, it has been observed in past year papers as well, that they ask you questions where after reading the statement of the question, you start feeling that a lot has to be written, and then you start writing, eventually realizing 1 minute later on that it's a 5-mark question, so you have to keep short. The word limit is also important, so you have to keep short of 100 words. Now, at that point of time, you might have already written your 50 words, and then there comes a trade-off that what to write next and what not to write next, where all the important stuff is still pending. So in such questions, in section A, 5-marker question, you have to be very careful of the information you're putting in your answer. So what the question is exactly asking, write that. Don't get into this ki I will write the definition also, I will write the introduction also very creatively. Don't. Write the introduction by writing what your question is asking you. So we will analyze these 2 questions. These 2 questions are very simple questions for any IES paper. So if you have prepared your basics well, then also any student could have attempted these 2 questions very easily. So 10 marks is something which are in your control from this paper clearly, because the marks deduction is also not on a very high chance if you attempt these 2 questions. These are very, very, very simple questions. Let's see. So the F part says, write down. So this is question number 1. Now we have A, B, C, D, E. All those belong to part A question, part A of the G1 paper, for which you can find the discussion in another video. This video is discussion for part B. So we have selected questions belonging to part B. So F part, write down the economic meaning of a first order derivative of short run production function. Interpret the situation where 1 second order derivative of that function is 0. Now, very simple. Whenever we start with the topic of differentiation in the syllabus, the first thing is talking about derivative. That what does derivative tell you? What do they imply? And I always mention to my students that when it comes to differentiation, the questions will always come in association with microeconomics. So microeconomics and differentiation are topics which are linked together to ask a question. Okay, now what is a short run? So here some important words to be taken care of is, they have talked about short run production function. Now, one thing I would tell you here is, which many students can make mistake here, they will avoid the word short run and then they will start writing the meaning of first order derivative. Why the first order derivative changes in short run and long run? So you know, in short run what happens is only your labor is variable. Only your labor is variable. But when I talk about my long run, even my capital as well as my labor, both of them can be variable. Both of them can be variable. So because of that, I need to make sure derivative always tell you the rate of change in something due to change in another variable. So since we are talking about short run, we only need to work on the first order derivative of labor. Now, what is my production function? My production function is a function of capital and labor. In short run, capital is constant. So first order derivative have to be figured out with respect to L. So what is this? This is the marginal productivity. Marginal productivity of labor. So what do we call this in economics? We call it MPL. Now what is this? This tells us that when the labor unit changes by 1, what what amount of change you would expect in your production function, the production or the output quantity. So that is the first order derivative. So you just simply have to start with the production function, then do mention. Now in while attempting the answer, you have to mention that because it is short run, k will be treated as constant. So first order derivative of production function with respect to labor is given by del q by del L, which is marginal productivity of labor. Now you have told the economic meaning. You have shown the examiner that you know the math side to this answer as well. Now coming to the second part of this question. Interpret the situation where one second order derivative of the function is 0. Now, second order derivative. So understand one thing. They have asked you first order. Now they're asking you second order derivative. Second order derivative always tell you the curvature of the function. So if you go with this approach that it tells you curvature of function, it means curvature of your production function. But if you just keep that thing aside and you just imagine that if I do the second order derivative with respect to labor itself, what does this tell me? This further tell me the slope of MPL or the behavior of MPL, right? Because over here, the first derivative has an economic meaning. Now I'm derivating MPL with respect to labor again. So it tells me the slope or it tells me the behavior of the marginal productivity labor curve. So if it is 0, always remember that whenever the second order derivative is 0, that is point of inflection. That is point of inflection. Basically, it is that point where the curvature is changing the shape. It is becoming constant, but it is not going from increasing to decreasing or decreasing to increasing. Okay, so for example, if you have a curve like this, if you see here, the derivative will be 0. Okay, but what is happening? The curve was decreasing before reaching this point, and the curve is still decreasing after reaching this point. So there is no change in the behavior of the function. It is still there, which means that when the second order derivative of the function will be 0, at that point, the function is not going to change its behavior at that point. Okay, so only a constant peak, a constancy in the function will be achieved. So that is your part number F. All right. Now, if we talk about your part number G, explain why adjusted R square they're asking, is important for testing the goodness of fit of a regression model. Now, this question is very good question, I would say, because I can write the answer for 15 marks as well for this question, as well as for 5 marks. Now, where does the key lies here? First thing, you have to definitely talk about why adjusted R square is a better thing to measure goodness of fit. But meanwhile, when you're doing that, you also need to bring the comparison between adjusted R square and R square, the simple coefficient of determination. So you can start your answer with the introduction that adjusted R square is a better measure for goodness or fit than R square. You can start with comparison also, because it takes into consideration, it also imposes the penalty after taking into consideration the variables you are adding to improve the fit. Whereas R square, so don't focus too much on R square in this, just one line. R square, when I add more explanatory variables, R square will increase no matter what. But adjusted R square will impose penalty if I keep on increasing more explanatory variables. So then you can write the formula of adjusted R square as well, which is 1 minus R square n minus 1 upon n minus k, like this. Then you can mention why it is a better fit, because it takes into consideration that how many variables I'm adding. So I'm also losing degrees of freedom when I'm adding more variables. It imposes penalty if I keep on adding more variables to improve the R square. Also, adjusted R square tells you whether an explanatory variable has to be added to the model or not. Because if adjusted R square starts decreasing, it means the variable you are adding is not bringing benefit to you. So adjusted R square ke upar we are seeing repetitive things like last to last year also adjusted R square got into attention and a question appeared from there, but these two questions were very decent. So these are the two questions. So 10 marks from section A were asked. So this is mathematical economics question, whereas this is your econometrics based question. Okay. Now moving on to the next. Section B. We are starting with section B now. So in section B, question number 7 appeared from quantitative methods in economics. Let's see. Both of the two questions are coming from linear programming problem. Linear programming problem. So it is always mentioned by me to my students that LPP is a topic which has never to be left out. It's that one topic, this topic LPP, and then input output. These two topics are such that key questions aayenge hi aayenge. There is no chance that question won't be asked from here. They are definitely going to come. So even if you see here 9 marks for part A and 9 marks for part B, very, very simple questions, but then also there can be chances of mistakes that a student can make. Now, how to solve these questions? Part A, let's start with part A. So here you have to define feasible solution, basic feasible solution, optimal solution of linear programming problem. So don't write two big paragraphs. I will suggest you write a heading feasible solution and mention what it is. Then write basic feasible solution and give the explanation, then optimal solution. That's how you should go around it. Do not use a long paragraph to explain these three terms. Now, what is a feasible solution? Feasible solution is basically the set of all the points which satisfy your constraints in your linear programming problem. So there can be infinite number of points that can be feasible. Feasible means that yes, this solution is feasible and it is satisfying all my constraints. Basic feasible is basically the points at the vertex. So for example, if this is how your LPP looks like, and this is your feasible solution, this shaded portion is my feasible solution. This is my feasible solution because it is satisfying both of my constraints. Okay, then these points, these corner points of your feasible region are your basic feasible solution. Optimal solution. Optimal solution is that one particular point out of your feasible solution which actually maximizes or minimizes your given objective problem. So if I'm maximizing, it will maximize my problem. If I'm minimizing, it will minimize it. Now you have to explain these concepts by taking a hypothetical constraint minimization problem. So here you can take numerical problem as well, where you just have to minimize. You can work with by taking two variables, let's say x and y. So let's say you are minimizing 3x plus 2y. And then you can take two constraints as well. Other than that, the most simple or the most better thing you could have done is you could have minimized your cost function. Or you can also write it like this: minimize ax plus by. like this. Subject to a11x x plus a12y, like this, less than greater than equal to b1, like this, because this is the most simplest way how we study LPP. So by doing this, the examiner would get a hint that yes, you have actually done the topic. So I prefer this one to get higher score than the exact numerical example. So that is how you can show a minimization problem in LPP. Then part B was about solving the profit maximization problem using the graphical method. Graphical method say you have to solve. Now, how do you solve using graphical method? You will first plot all of these constraints. You will plot all of these constraints. Then you will find the feasible area, feasible region. Then those feasible regions say you will get your optimal solution. Basically, that value of x1, x2, which is actually going to maximize this. So this is a very direct and simple question to do. Very direct and very simple. You just have to plot them. Now, in plotting, I know people will get stuck at x1 less than 6, x2 less than 3. So I tell you, how do you need to go around this? How do you need to go around this? Let's have a look here. If I plot x1 less than 6, what does it mean? Do you know? It just means if this is 6, if this is 6, let's say, then x1 less than 6 means, so x1 I will take on this axis and x2 I will take on this axis. So I will draw 6 here and x2 less than 3 here. So this is less than 6, this is less than 3. So less than 6 basically means all the area before 6, and x2 less than 3 means all the area below this line. So this is the common portion to them. Then we have another constraint, which is x1 plus 2x2 equals to 8, because when you plot, you take equal to. So this will also give you coordinates, right? And then you can find the feasible region. So you can very simply plot this. Let's see that. X1 plus 2x2 equals to 8. Now if x1 is 0, x2 is equal to 4. If x2 is 0, then x1 is equal to 8. I have not taken a proper scale here, but you can still understand this. This is going to be 8 and this is, let's say, going to be 4. So I'm saying when x1 is 0, x2 is 4. This is the point. And then when x2 is 0, x1 is 8. So this is the graph I will have. So ho sakta hai that my graph will pass from exactly this point, because I have not taken the exact scale. So I might be facing this issue, but you can understand that. I don't have a scale here. So it will most probably pass from this point. So below than that means all the area below this. So again, this will be a feasible region. Okay, that's how you will solve this. Very simple question. Now moving on to next set of questions. So 18 marks were allotted to quantitative, specifically mathematical economics in section B. No more questions from maths were asked in section B. Now moving on to section C. So section C, question number 8. Now in section C, we have 25 mark questions. So it is not necessary that all the parts will be asked from the same part A, part B. No. So our question 8, only part A and only part B were belonging to quantitative methods in economics. So part A, define the rank of metrics. Now if you will see 2 plus 3 plus 3, this bifurcation is very important to look at. Because what happens is when we write answer, we forget what they're asking, even though it is an 8 marker question. But every part has very minute marks, 2, 3, 3. So you can imagine less than 100 words also you have to write. So define rank of metrics. So first part is rank of metrics you have to define. Just tell in very clear words what is rank. What is rank now? Rank is the number of linearly independent columns and linearly independent rows in a matrix. So you can even write that Mathematical formula that rank of matrix A is less than equal to minimum m or n. So m is the number of rows and n can be the number of columns. So this is the formula we write to represent rank. Now write down the implications of the full rank assumption of a multiple linear regression model. This is for 3 marks. Why is full rank assumption not required for simple linear? This is again for 3 marks. Now remember, many students will feel that I don't know that even there is an assumption. We have only studied OLS, the classical assumptions in my regression model. Where is this full rank assumption coming from? So, can you imagine that how beautifully they have clubbed mathematical economics as well as econometrics? How beautifully. Now you just have to don't have to think even outside of the box. I tell you what to do in such situations. So you know what is rank of matrix. Now, if you know what is rank of matrix, you would also know what is full rank. The full rank is the case where all the rows or all the columns. So if I have a square matrix, let's say A is 4 by 4, and if rank of A is 4, that means it's a full rank matrix, which means all the rows, all the columns are independent. Now that is what I have. Why will I need full rank assumption in a multiple linear regression model? How does my linear regression model looks like? It is yi equals to beta 1 plus beta 2 x2i. I'm taking multiple linear regression. Beta 3 x3i plus mu I, let's say. Now, full rank assumption is first of all required for your x matrix. If I write this, in matrix form, it would be y equals to x into beta plus your random error term you have. Okay. So full rank, y is always going to be a vector. Error term always a vector. Beta is always going to be a vector again. Only x can be a matrix. So of course, full rank assumption is talked about the x matrix. Now, why do I need full rank? So understand what is rank. Rank is linear independence of rows and column. Now, if I'm saying that I need full rank in multiple linear, why do I need full rank? Which means I don't want linear independence between my rows and column. This is very obvious. This is hinting towards the assumption of multicollinearity. So full rank assumption is required because if X matrix is full rank, it clearly indicates that my X variables does not have any linear relationship, which shows the presence of no multicollinearity, and which is one very important assumption for my model to give me correct results. So that is why you require full rank assumption, even if you also require X to be full rank because you need to solve the model and you need to get the value of beta. If X won't be full rank, if there is linear dependency, I will not be able to find unique values for beta. So you just have to remember features, remember things about rank, full rank, and then use them, bring them here towards econometrics and match where they are matching. That's the technique only. Now they're asking, why is full rank assumption not required for simple linear? The answer is pretty much clear, because in simple linear regression, you just have one explanatory variable. So in my X, basically what happens is for beta 1, X will be 0, 0, 0 because there is no X. So when I have a simple linear regression, I have a beta 1 ki value that is constant and X ki value only on this side. So that can never be linearly dependent, because if I have one variable, how can they be linearly dependent? Yes, there is no chance of more than one variable because I have simple linear regression model. So multicollinearity things go away. Even then, you have just the value of the beta 1 here, and then you have your beta 2 into x1. So I know x1, x2, x3s are changing every time. They are not fixed. So there is no point of, again, dependency in the rows and the column. That's why full rank assumption is not required. So this is the breakdown of part A. Now talking about part B. This part B is clearly something like out of my notes basically. Why? How? Explain the concept of eigenvalues and eigenvectors associated with a square symmetric matrix. How are these concepts used in principal component analysis? Now 5 plus 5, 10 marks mein this is coming. First thing, a very common mistake which I feel students can make is they will only answer this. Why we use eigenvalues, eigenvectors in principal component, but that is only for 5 marks. You have to first talk about eigenvalues, you have to talk about eigenvectors, and about the square symmetric matrix. You have to talk about these three things in 5 marks. So you will tell what are eigenvalues, you will tell what is an eigenvector, what is a square matrix, square symmetric matrix. So what are eigenvalues and eigenvectors? So for example, if I have a matrix, I say its eigenvector is x and eigenvalues are lambda. So it means either I multiply A with X or I multiply lambda with X, the effect will be same. So I multiply my matrix with its eigenvector or I multiply eigenvalue with eigenvector. The answer will be same. So you will explain this and then you will come to how these concepts are used in PCA. So principal component analysis is a technique of dimensionality reduction to correct the problem of multicollinearity. So why do we use? So in PCA we form matrix and covariance matrix, and there we use the eigenvalues and eigenvectors concept. Now I show you something. If you have done these notes, this is directly coming from there. Okay, so this is principal component analysis. In principal component analysis, we talk about the steps of PCA. So step 1 is standardization, step 2 is covariance matrix. So now as soon as I make my covariance matrix, I calculate the eigenvectors and eigenvalues of covariance matrix, which further give me my principal components. So you have to only talk about this step number 3 in your answer. So you can see here that we need to compute eigenvectors and eigenvalues in order to determine the principal components. They are actually the direction of axis where there is most information, which is known as principal components, and eigenvalues are simply the coefficients attached to eigenvectors, which give the amount of variance carried in each principal component. Hence, eigenvalues are also known as factors. So even if you just write this, your 5 marks are saved. So this is directly for our students, this is directly from our notes itself. Okay, so with this, we have done question 8, part A and part B. That is 18 marks again are saved here. Now talking about question number 12. So question number 12 is also of 10 marks. Now question number 12. Now moving on to next question. Question number 12. So question number 12 is also of 10 marks. So it has 3 parts. Again, a very probable question as I mentioned. Input output is a topic which is asked in every exam of IES. So it's a highly probable question which will be asked. Following table shows the coefficient of an economy consisting of 3 industries, each producing for their internal use as well as external demand. So first to first 0.20, all of these coefficients are given. Interpret each row and each column. Now here the task comes on. What does each row and each column of the matrix basically means? So if we go with first row, what is first row telling me? What is first row going to tell me? So first row is telling me that what percentage of industry first output is going towards industry 1, is going towards industry 2, is going towards industry 3 to satisfy their demand of 1 unit if they have to produce 1 unit. What is 0.15? If we understand it in this way, what is 0.15? 0.15 means that I need 0.15 units from industry 1 to produce 1 unit of industry 2. So this is the interdependence between first and second. So how much units I require from first industry to produce 1 unit of industry 2? 0.15. So what is first row giving me? First row is giving me that how to produce 1 unit of first industry, to produce 1 unit of second industry, to produce 1 unit of third industry. How many units from industry 1 are required? That is the input demand of industry 1 by first, second, third industry. Likewise, row 2, row 3 can be interpreted. Column 1, 2, column 3 will have inverse interpretation. So column 1 tells me that what is the input demand of first industry? From first, from second, from third industry. That is, if first industry is producing 1 unit output, how much does it require from first, from second, and from third? That is column. So done, 5 marks saved. Calculate Leontief inverse matrix. Now, what is Leontief inverse matrix? Leontief inverse matrix is I minus A inverse. Okay, that is your Leontief inverse. Now, this given matrix is a A matrix. So from this, you will calculate I minus A and then you will do I minus A inverse. What should be the required output by each industry to meet the external error demand given by the following matrix? Now, this is your final demand. Now they are asking what is the total output. So how can I calculate total output? We all know I minus A into X is equal to Y. So X, which is the total output vector, that is I minus A inverse into Y. So if you just solve this, over here, I'm just replacing Y with D. They are writing D to that. So D over here. So I will just, in part B, I have already calculated I minus A inverse. I will multiply that with the D vector and I'm going to get the output, gross output of all these three industries. So very simple question. So again, your 15 marks will be saved here. Okay. So 10 marks will be saved here. All right. So this is your question number 12 from section C. Now in this part, we are stopping here, and another question from the same paper, IES 2025 G1 part B questions, will be discussed in part 2 of this video. So please go to our YouTube channel and do watch part 2 of this video as well to complete your paper analysis from G1 part B of IES 2025 exam. I hope this video, this specific paper analysis, is very useful for you. If you like this, please share it with your friends and do let us know that if you want specific solution to any particular question from this examination. Thank you.